definition and expression of sexuality. I think that you're probably familiar with the fact that not everybody on the planet sees it the same way. You're probably hearing news reports right now about women in the Middle East and in Turkey in particular, actually, who are being seriously censored any kind of expressions of sexuality. This is heteronormative sexuality. This isn't even things that people consider odd. This is just sexuality. But we had a lot of influences. A lot of them come from movies, and they change with time. If you think about, Doris Day was the ultimate in femininity. Marilyn Monroe, right? Rock Hudson, who turned out to be so gay, right? Was the ultimate epitome man, right? So these ideas that sexuality is a more open thing, like if you want to get an idea about the difference between how you look at open sexuality just within our own culture for the last 50 years, watch an episode of Gidget. Gidget was Sally Fields as a young woman, right? Watch an episode of Gidget where, she and boys are always having a go-round, right? And I don't think she ever actually kisses a boy on the screen. But they are having beach parties, so a lot of the scenes are in like bikinis and shorts and all of that. She's in love with a boy named Moondoggy. And then take and watch something like, I don't know, that 70s show or something where we have more recent ideas of what our current sexuality is. We have more of an impact on distance sexual education. Sexual relations. Sorry, distance education is something I talk about every day. Teaching online, right? Distance sexual relations. Let's talk about Tinder for a second. All right, so what happens in Tinder? What happens? I mean, I'm not from the moon, guys. I know it exists. Do you have short-term sexual relationships with people? Yeah, sure. Does anyone here not know what Tinder is? Oh my God, really? Poor uncool souls. So this is an app, essentially, that is a hookup app. And it allows you to very quickly make a judgment on someone based on their physical characteristics, and then whether or not you appreciate their physical characteristics, you can then engage in a chat format with them. It typically, though, kind of leads to sexting. I mean, it kind of starts with sexting. It's not very far from sexting, and people have these relationships with each other where they never even see each other. And I say relationship, it's a little bit difficult for me to look at that as a relationship. They sometimes last 60 seconds. But sometimes they're longer. Sometimes you have these continued chats with folks. Things like Snapchat have changed how we look at sexuality, right? Snapchat, the land of child pornography. Well, you don't look at it as child pornography, but remember, you guys were probably under 18 when you were using it with each other, so it technically counts as child pornography. I don't know if you know this, but you can be arrested for having naked pictures of yourself under 18. Yeah. In California, you can be arrested for having naked pictures of yourself under 18. So when you snap that picture, we'll just even out the playing field. When you took that dick pic or tit pic of yourself to send to a potential admirer, or you took that selfie of yourself half or all naked in the bathroom, you were under 18, you were committing a sex crime. I know. You're like, nope. I actually don't agree that it's a sex crime. You guys were roughly the same age and swapping photos of each other. It was hardly a child pornography ring. However, I do think it's hilarious that some of you use the save feature, which I didn't even know you could for a while, and now there's a whole bunch of photos of you from high school that are floating around the net. Could not convince you that it was not impermanent. You were like, no, Snapchat disappears. It turns out it didn't. Turns out they've been saved all this time. Just like your parents said they would be. And you were like, no, you don't understand the technology. Anyway, there are places in the world where sexuality are the point of people visiting. Something called sex tourism. These are places where we have individuals who are, typically they're exploited to become sex workers. And Westerners will go to these places with the idea of employing individuals for sex. Thailand used to be like the #1 place to go for sex tourism. That no matter what your tastes were, you could find that in Thailand. But now we have, it almost seems less skeezy. It's not less skeezy, it just seems less skeezy. If you had a guy that you were like, he was like, I'm going to Thailand, to go have sex with some girl boys. You'd be like, oh, you, poor kids, right? But if you have a guy like, I'm going single to go to the Sandals Resort in the Dominican Republic, or whatever resort in the Dominican Republic, you'd be like, oh, have a good vacation. Same thing. Many of those what seem very cosmopolitan, very standard places will have these available sex resorts. When I was in Jamaica, I picked an all-inclusive resort that I really enjoyed, and while I was going through the tour book of what was local, I found out that if we had only gone 3 more miles, we could have gone to a hooker motel. All-inclusive, pools, meals, and hookers, just a few steps away, and it was pitched to couples. Right? Bring your spouse, spice it back up. And I was like, well, no. And I showed it to my husband, and I was like, and he was like, no, that's just ewy. I know. But that's the problem. So you tend to find these sexual tourisms in economically depressed areas. So again, we're seeing this situation under globalism, right? The well-off Westerners fly to these exotic places to sexually exploit people who have a low socioeconomic base. There's a book called The Age of Consent, a sex tourist guide, to make sure that if you're in a country where they tell you 12's okay, if there's grass on the field, play ball. If that's actually the case. So this is where we see sex trafficking. It's about whether or not it's legal. So here, if you look at these light-colored areas, trafficking is illegal and rare. That probably doesn't surprise you that in Greenland, sex trafficking is illegal and rare because, well, Greenland, right? It might be sexy to be out of your parka. And these other places in Europe where it's illegal and rare, but we start seeing places where it's not illegal and it's practiced. These dark green areas, sex trafficking is not illegal and it's a regular practice. So bringing in women or kidnapping women or forcing women into prostitution, and it's not just women, but women are the majority, is not illegal. We have sex trafficking literally right below us. You're here. You're there. And that's how close it is. And we certainly have border crossing where there are women who are brought in, smuggled in from Mexico, and they work off their passage of sex trafficking. It's not cool, man. So Denise Brennan looked at sex tourism in a Caribbean island where it was specifically Dominican women who were sex workers, and the Westerners were coming and paying for these exotic fantasies, and the people who there have their own exotic fantasy, and their exotic fantasy is getting enough money to leave and go west. So it's a very interesting exchange. So most women who get involved usually do it to support their families. There's very rarely ever a woman who's like, I don't know, McDonald's, working at the local grocery store, or sex trafficking. It's not something that you put on your list of possibilities. You end up forced there. So their strongest hope is that one of the tourists will fall in love with them and take them back home with them. You know, hookers with a heart of gold. So that's never going to happen, right? This idea of globalization is going both ways, but the actual reality for the women is they are never leaving that situation. So the government says, hey, tourists, come on in, and for the most part, we don't go the same way, right? The Dominicans are all like, hey, if you want to immigrate here, that's fine, and we say, hey, if you want to immigrate here, tough luck. Too bad, we have a small quota. So even if a guy is like, hey, I really do love my hooker with a heart of gold, he may not even be able to bring her back, even if he has the best intentions. And of course, because prostitution is not technically legal, they can be abused horribly, just like sex trafficking isn't legal. There's no route for them to seek justice or to find protection, because since they're doing something that's already illegal, what are they going to do? You know, they got smacked by somebody who was paying them, or choked by someone who was paying them. How exactly are they going to stop? So it becomes quite a mess. Now we're looking at Nigeria, and we're looking at the discussion basically regarding sexualization of individuals. The anthropologist was looking at, who was looking at a group of men they call the Masuharka. This is basically what it means is people who do the deed, and it is specifically men who have sex with other men, and there are two different kinds of men who have sex with other men. Civilians are the ones who maintain the masculine general, like we saw earlier before we were talking about this occurring in Mexico. They look like men, they act like men, they dress like men. And then the Yanduko are the ones who are the Yandalu are the ones who will, their gender expression will become female, and they will become very feminine in the way they behave and in the things that they do. And yet our idea of homosexuality, it doesn't match this. And the reason it doesn't match this is that it's seen as essentially a job. So they may take on a female gender role and do all those things. It's a job. And then when they go home, they have wives and kids, and they are males within their home, and that is their job there. And so for us, it doesn't quite match. And what's really interesting is that a bunch of them were Muslims. And it was not considered incongruent with their faith, because it's not their actual, they're still having families, and they're still having a normal life. It's just their 9 to 5 is this, which is, I think, a little harder for us to wrap our heads around. So we end up with complications of a bunch of, we find people who want to aid same-sex communities. Sometimes they don't necessarily understand that there may be some more complicated issues in here, and they're trying to stop the persecution of same-sex couples who are same-sex couples 24 hours a day experience. Unfortunately, the backlash, which isn't on this slide, is that they started promoting this idea that sexuality was part of their permanent identity. That you were either homosexual or you were heterosexual. At which point the government of Nigeria started looking at things differently. So way they felt for their homosexual brethren, they actually redefined what being homosexual was, which criminalized it. And now you can be put to death for being homosexual, which wasn't possible before because they didn't look at it that way. It was not seen in the form of sexual behavior. All right. I'd like to begin one part of this by laying some theory math. If you read your chapter ahead of time like you were supposed to, you've probably already figured out that some of this looks like anthropology math. Actually, those are just schematic diagrams to describe how people describe a system. So when we're talking about kinship and you're looking at those triangles and those circles, triangles are boys and circles are girls. If something's a square, that means we don't know. So, for example, you may have a father who had a wandering set of gametes. Your father may have been Johnny Appleseed, and you may be aware that there are 3 other kids besides yourself, but you only know the gender of 2 of them, or the sex of 2 of them, right? That 3rd kid would be a square. This is important because you're going to be producing a diagram of your own. Okay. Now, all these diagrams is a schematic way or a visual way of representing how people connect themselves to other people. Right? So the most simple way of looking at this, here. I am female. At the moment I sprung from nothing. Let's ignore that I have parents. We equal sign me to a male. I am no longer with that male. I am with another male, though. This is how we would define my marital state. I was married, equal sign, but was, / do my equal sign. But from that, became a person. Spencer Pratt. So this is me, Roger, Spencer, Rick. Right? Now, do I need to do Rick's family? No. Do I need to do Roger's family? No, because this is my diagram. If it were Spencer's diagram, well then he'd have to follow his mom's side and his dad's side. But this is my diagram, so we're going to follow me for a second. Mine gets really complicated. Okay, I belong to Dad and Mom. And he, I'm going to put it out here, was married her, which produced her, and she, these are the twins. This is Tim and Justin. This is Glenn. Okay, neat discounts, by the way. I would give myself a negative point for having this little rocky thing. All right, but that wasn't his only wife. Right, now there's my stepmom. Okay. But my father has a sister and a brother. And his sister, sorry, Shirley. She was married and she had a daughter who is married and has Eric, Elizabeth, Anthony, oh crap, Elizabeth, hold on. Eric, we need to get a little more space. We don't want to do this in pencil. Because she has kids. Okay. I don't think Eric's ever been married. She probably has. Okay. But then he married, and they had Frank, who was married right up until her green card came through. And that's a sad thing. She left him a note that was like, I never loved you, thanks for the green card. And she was gone. I know, right? They were high school sweethearts. But I guess she didn't really like him. And they have dogs. Okay, so it didn't matter whether I was talking about my mom's side or my dad's side. We call those people cousins. Who are these people to me? They're also cousins, right? And we call them, I think it's your second cousins. Actually, no, they're first cousins once removed because they're actually my same, they're my same generation. Because I'm the same age as these guys. So, first cousin, technically he becomes my second cousin. So, Gabe is my second cousin. But when we start playing that game, cousin, that's not very specific, is it? This is my aunt, right? She is also my aunt. Notice the lack of blood, but I still call her the same thing. See, that's the thing about kinship for us. Kinship, in American kinship, our kin are equal to us in their unimportance. Our kin are equally unimportant to us, left and right. Am I as related to my mother's family as I am to my father's family?
Yes.
Yes. Not everyone sees it that way. And actually, who you're related to in some places is more important than where you were born, than how old you are. In some places, like in among the Ashanti, the very first question is not where are you from, but who are you from? Because by asking you who you are from, they can figure out how they're related to you, and by figuring out how they're related to you, they can figure out what their obligation to you is. Because for them, kinship carries obligation. For us, kinship carries some obligation as well. Let's just look at this for a second. So here, if this person is starving, do I have an obligation to her?
Yeah.
Right. She's my father's daughter. She's my sister. We don't share the same mom, so we call her Aunt. But she's my father's daughter. Do I have an obligation to these children? Yes. In fact, very similar to the obligation I have to my own. Right? That's why I have my sister's kid with me, because this obligation is very strong. Do I have the same obligation to these children? No, I do not. In fact, you saw I had to struggle to think of their names, right? These are actually, they share an eighth of my genetic material at minimum. And yet, there I am going, Eric, and Elizabeth, and Anthony. Now, Eric I know a little better than I do Elizabeth, but only because we're friends on Facebook. And we're both huge Doctor Who nerds and fair nerds, and he and I completely understand each other. We have the same sort of references. His sister, not so much. She's a real nice lady. She teaches music in high school. Brave soul. Right? We don't really know each other. Now, if you start playing this game on my mom's side, I know my cousins on my mom's side much more, right? I lived with them for a while, and I knew them very well. I consider them close relatives, and yet, when distributing resources, I would be more likely to distribute resources to a sister, a brother, and their siblings, than I would to a cousin, right? You can kind of think about, even though you may be equally related to people, think about right now if you were planning a wedding. All right, so you're planning a wedding, your guest list is 100 people. Who do you invite? You're like, okay, well, I invite my family. Really? All of them? You will find that some of your family becomes so much less family. When you've got 100, you still have your friends there. Those are your, kind of family too, right? So you want to have your friends. If I invited my whole family, actually, if I invited my whole family, it's not very big. I could have squeezed the whole thing, but not, most people didn't. We were not full of fake readers. So, my grandma's side, sure, up on the top,
helping me understand what it's like to live with siblings. I did not have that. My sister, the one who made the kids, she was already back in Germany. So I had this family. All of a sudden, I, by the way, started life as an only child, and I ended as the youngest. Can you imagine a thing more spoiled in the world than me? Because not only did the whole world revolve around me always, then I found other people to do my bidding and make sure that it still revolved around me, lest I begin to cry. It's brilliant. When you're an only child, you can manipulate no one with your tears. When you are the youngest, you can manipulate everybody. It was great. However, my siblings are much bigger than I am, so some of those tears were genuine. My stepsister still, who I can refer to as my sister, but she's 6'2". So, like, she'd tell me to clean my room, and I'd be like, no! And she'd be like, and I'd be like, yes! I'm going! I'm going! Even still, she threatened me the other day over something, and I was like, yes, ma'am. I'm still scared of you. But I love her. She's not there. She's not on this list. Because we actually define biological kinship as different than family. These are different things. So, when we talk about kinship, we're talking about this network of individuals where you have certain mutual rights and obligations. So if I were to draw my actual kinship here, it wouldn't have all the right lines to it. Because the people that are part of my family include something we call fictive kin. So fictive kin is a term we use to describe people we call kin who are not actually biological kin. Even if you have a fully intact family without steps or anything like that, when you have an aunt and an uncle and they're married to each other, you call them aunt and uncle. Hopefully, unless you live in Kentucky, only one of them is actually related to you. But you see them, in your head, they're the same thing, right? Aunt and uncle. And you see yourself as these are people you're obligated to, and who are obligated to you, right? So those would be called fictive kin. A better example of fictive kin is my stepmom, my stepsister, my stepbrother. All of those have a fictive kin name on them. Brother, mother, sister. And we tell you they're fictive kin, they're pretend kin, or afons, by saying step. When I say step, you know that I'm indicating that they are fictive kin. However, they have been my brother and sister and mom for a long time. 30, I'm not telling you years, oh, you almost got me. over 30 years. Long ago, I dropped step as a reasonable thing. I mean, they were the ones who, if I broke something, took me to the hospital. Were there at the birth of my son, right? Those are my family, and I was there at the birth of theirs. My stepsister, my sister, and I raised our boys together. They're only 5 months apart, and we raised them like brothers. When I say, Spencer, do you have a brother? He says, no. Well, sort of. Right? He has Matthew, which is very much like a brother. I'm trying to get him to develop that relationship with his cousin Tim, who he's actually biologically related to, but it's not working out. When he was a little kid, he always asked me for a little brother. He was like, I want a little brother, I want a little brother, and I wasn't having any more babies, and I was like, nope, never gonna happen. If you want a little brother, look at your dad. I'm not doing it. And his dad gave him a little sister, what he always wanted, right? He treats that child like she's made of gold. Really good kids. But then when Tim came, Tim is small. Some of you have seen him come in the back of the room at the end of class. He's really small. When Tim came, I was like, hey, I brought you a little brother. Because he's older than him. I said, little brother, look, I brought you a little one. And he was like, not funny. No, you didn't. People are dead to me, right? So we may have very, very, very close relatives that we don't see as family or as belonging to our kinship. And when we look at other cultures, they may see family very, very differently. They may see only their dad's side as their family and their mom's side not related. In fact, even marriageable. because they're not related. Their mom is, but their mom's entire family, no, not so much. Or it may go the other way. Mom's family is where your blood comes from, and dad's family, well, they exist as people, but they're not family. Or you may have a situation in which everyone who marries in is family, and now their family is also now family, and therefore unmarriageable. Yeah. So we have what's considered very general kinship terminology. Very general kinship terminology actually tells you about the levels of obligations. And we have this general, everybody who belongs to my dad's brothers and sisters, or my mom's brothers and sisters, or cousin, right? Even grandma, grandpa, not super specific, tells us that their level of obligation to us is very small. In societies where they have very, very specific kinship terms, tells you this one's my mother's first child, my mother's sister's kid, or my mother's sister's first kid, my mother's sister's second kid, my mother's sister's third kid, all have a different name. You know that there are levels of obligation that are nested there. So, we may make decisions about who we're related to. Obviously, biology plays a part of this. This is not just because we worry that if we start having sex with such close relatives, we're going to get kids with extra heads. But it's because we look at creating marriages as creating new family bonds, right? So every time we group people together, we are creating new family bonds. Now, here's something I don't want to freak you out. Actually, it'll be fun. When you marry your spouse, their mother becomes your mother-in-law, and their father becomes your father-in-law. Okay, so what about their siblings? So their brother becomes your, and their sister becomes your sister. So if your spouse's brother is also your brother, what does that make you to your spouse? Ew. Right? If their mother's your mother and their brother's your brother, hey, guess what you just became? Siblings. Right. And we never think about that, do we? We're like, oh, I'm getting a bunch of in-laws. Yeah, and turning your spouse into your sibling.
Oh, no,
You're going to add that?
I've always thought about that.
It's weird. It's very weird. We call it the conjugal bond, that bond. It's creepy. Except that it's also not creepy. I mean, I can tell you, having entered into this twice, because I'm a slow learner, the family that I made in my first marriage remains my family. They didn't have to. Obviously, we got divorced. We could all be like, kumbaya, my friends, kumbaya, right? But my first husband's mother is still my friend. And she still emails me, and it says mother, and she sends me birthday and Christmas presents and cards. And when I'm sad, she knows and sends me some sort of silly puppies rolling down a hill. My current mother-in-law is closer to my own age. I mean, not much closer. I didn't like marry a child or anything. But she was a very, very young bride. She had my husband at like 17. So there's not this huge gap in age between her. And while I'm supposed to think of her as my mother, it's a little weird. I think of her as a very nice person who is also my friend and the mother of my husband whom I love. His sister, however, I look at his sister, she's supposed to be my sister, right? She was a bonus baby. So there's a lot of years between my husband and his sister. Enough so that he could have been her father. Right. So I look at his sister, who is also only, what, like a year and a half older than my own kid? And I'm trying to look at her as sister, but I keep looking at her as a child. I see her as offspring. And I should take care of offspring. One of my friends who's an older sister was like, oh, you always see your siblings like that. Your younger siblings, you take care of them, and you tend to act like parent, and you tend to have parental responses to them. That's okay, it's not weird. I'm like, yeah, but I want to take her out and buy her clothes, because she's adorable, and I didn't have a girl, and I could dress her up. She looks just like Juno. She's adorable. You just want to turn her in. She looks like Ellen What's-Her-Face. You just want to turn her into like a doll. Or actually, she could also be Summer Glau as River in Firefly. She's very cute, and she's this big. And I look at her as a child. Now, is she my family? Yes. Right? And I've hardly had her very long, right? I mean, my husband and I will have been together as a couple 5 years in February. So not that long at all. But if she were in trouble, there is nothing that would stop me from getting to her. Right? Nothing. She is of family. Just like there's nothing would stop me from getting to Spencer. And as much as Spencer doesn't feel that way about Tim, nothing that would stop me from getting to Tim. Right? I would take care of him. If the house was on fire, I would run inside and grab him. I have a feeling Spencer and Rick would stop me. But I would run inside to get them. Just like I would, because here's that other thing. How many of you have fur family? I'm not talking about being a furry. That was last week. Fur family. You have a dog, a cat, a bird, a rat. Right? And we know that weirdly they are somehow in this. Right? Your fur family are your babies. I'm a grandma to an orange cat with a limp. Right? It's weird. Every time I'm like, oh, your grandmother? Well, sort of. Very small grandchild with hair. And my husband and I are never going to have biological children of our own, but we have adorable fur babies, right? And when the dog is bad, I'll say to him, your daughter is misbehaving. Go get your daughter and make her do the right thing. And when he says to the dogs, I'm like, go to mommy. And I know that sounds totally weird outside of the house, except that some of you kind of know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? My dog swallowed a needle not last Friday, but the Friday before. I spent a small car getting the needle taken out of him and having a splenectomy and the whole thing. And you ask yourself, Dr. Gray, are you wealthy? No. No, I'm a teacher. See line 1. Never wealthy people, right? Why did I spend it? He's my baby. I've had this dog for 2 men. I've had this dog longer than I've had this husband. Right? This dog and I were close. I had him since he was 8 weeks old. I did, in fact, cuddle him and put him to sleep at night and got up with him when he cried and the whole thing. It's my baby. Is it the same thing for Spencer? If Spencer swallowed a needle, I would get it out of him. Don't swallow a needle. But I don't know that, I mean, I'm not saying that I feel exactly the same way for my dog as I do for my son. If birding house goes down and I think I have to choose between son and dog, I'm going to choose son. But I believe that son can probably handle his own shit and dog cannot. So you have this sort of thing that works its way in there. Now, judging who you're related to has a lot more to do with culture than biology. Do I really see myself as biologically related to a corgi? Am I his mother? No, I certainly would not want to know what chain of events would have led to me giving birth. He's a total jerk. By the way, this is my jerk dog. I did this for my jerk dog. He may be a jerk, but he's my jerk. Right? Because it's a lot more than biology. So, when we start talking about our human family, start playing the game of genealogical descent. This means we start going, this person came from this person who came from this person. We call that blood relatives. Now, these are all the people, the folks you share genes with. And it's not, for us, when we draw them, our diagrams are very, very wide, but not very, very tall. Because we don't actually carry a lot of information about that kind of stuff. Unless it's a hobby for you. Right now, if I ask you, what were your great-grandparents' names? Do you know? Great-grandparents, not your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Your grandparents' parents' names. Jesse, that's one. That's two. You know there are four of them. Right, and so a lot of us are like, I can name one! I can name mine, but because my dad shares the name of one of them, so I know that one. And because some of them have funny names, like Mimi. Right, like I remembered there was Mimi and Donut. Right, who can forget Donut? It's a German name, it's a normal name. Donut. Yeah, I know. It's like, come on. If it's a boy, let's name it Donut. Let's do that. So these are all people in our descent line, right? As long as they didn't marry into the family. As long as they're the people that contribute our genes, they're in our blood relatives. But do we know very much about them? No. When you draw your own family tree thingy, your family trees are really, really, really wide. You know all about, or a lot about, the cousins. You know about your parents, siblings, and their kids. And you probably know your parents' parents. You may have met them. You probably met them. We're living longer. Your grandparents, right? Your grandparents, both sides, you probably have some memory of these folks, right? You probably didn't meet their parents, or if you did, you were a baby, right? So that gets further back, and so if you start asking, okay, did your grandparents have siblings? Right, we don't even know that much. It's our parents' parents, and we ask them, do you have siblings? And a lot of us go, huh, I don't know. Right? Or did your great-grandparents have siblings? Unless it was a hobby of yours, you don't know. These people are running around with your genes. And you're like, yeah. But you really know all these married folks. That as long as they're alive. Now, why is that the case in American society? It's because we literally do not give a shit. And the reason we do not give a shit is these people have no value to us in the sense that they do not have any obligations to us. In a society where kinship is everything, you know these folks. There are people who can trace themselves back to what they call the Great Father. They can go back hundreds of generations. It's crazy. The Tib of Nigeria, every single person belongs. There are 800,000 Tib, and every single one belongs into this segmented lineage, and they all get back to the Great Father. Yeah. Wow. That's what we call unilineal descent. So, by the way, they can all get back to the Great Father through men. Unilineal descent. You'll find when you have these really complicated kinship systems where they go back generation after generation after generation, everybody knows, they're following the men. They're usually not following the women. There are very few unilineal descent groups where they're following women, which is, by the way, the more logical way to do it. You always know who your mom is. Right. Your dad is assumed. Your mom is known. Right? You always know this. Because your mom is the carrier. Yeah, may or may not have been the donator. So, male groups, we call those patrilineal. If you trace through your father, females are matrilineal. Our naming system in North America is patrilineal. So if you try to imagine how people could decide they're not related to one side, you actually understand this. Your last name. Your last name, not 100% of the time, but pretty regularly came from your father. You're not supposed to be your father. Right? Came from your father. Did it come from your mother too? No, you just took the dad's name.
right? When you marry, if you are female, do you keep it? No, you take the husband's name. Why do you take the husband's name? Because you are contributing children to his lineage. That's actually why. When he married you, he gained rights to your children, and by naming them, they become his children, whether or not they're actually his children. Yeah, it's very. Humans have worked out that there may be a problem in a long time ago. Now, we live in bilateral descent. We see ourselves equally related to both, even though our naming system is unilateral. Don't get confused. So, I'll give you an example. Actually, let's give you an example over here. You do it with me. All right. Okay, we'll do it this way. When I was born Alexis Hunnick. This is my dad's last name. Okay. When I married, I became Alexis Gray. Does that mean I wasn't a Hunnick anymore? Did the rest of the Hunnicks fail to see me? Did I cease to exist as a Hunnick? No. Can I make more Hunnicks? No. Right? I do not make more Hunnicks, I make Grays. Right? Now, does that mean that my son is not a Hunnick? Well, kind of is, but sociologically, no, he's a Gray. But if we lived in a different situation, he would be a Hunnick. But if we lived in a matrilineal, he'd be a Hunnick. So we can show you this by showing you when the rules are broken. So here's Hunnick. Just lowercase my own last name. Okay. And she was a Hunnick, but isn't anymore. He's a Hunnick. And they are Hunnicks, and that's a Hunnick. Now, Jessica, my sister, when born, was a Hunnick. Right? Came from my father as well. When she had these two boys, I've married them and divorced them for the sake of convenience. Because children don't spring out of nothing. And they didn't spring out of nothing, but a few hours together hardly a marriage makes. They were a party favor. Got it. So they weren't really a couple. They had a short, they spent some recreational time together at a party. And the recreational time, these are the party favors. So, because they were not married, these two children were named Hunnick. That's right. There you go. Both of these children are named Hunnick. Are they Hunnicks? No. Right, okay, we're like, right. Well, we'd say culturally no, biologically yes. Right? Would we kick them out of the Hunnick line? No, in fact, actually, we need them. We desperately need them. Because this guy that I erased, he's never going to have any babies. He's a mistake. We actually voted the most likely machine gun family at some point. It's non-duck. And what's funny is my entire family, when you say, oh, the Hunnicks are going to die out, they go, yeah, it's terrible. The Hunnicks are going to die out. And then we go, no, there's Justin and Tim. And they all go, oh, they're not real Hunnicks. But if Jessica had been a boy, they would be real Hunnicks. That's how patrilineage works. If Jessica had been a boy, those boys would be part of her boy line, would be part of her line. But because she's not, it belongs to someone else's line. Now, we do not figure biology that way in our culture, but we name like this. So that's, you can get how unilineal descent systems work by figuring out how you would name the child. That will tell you how the system works, even though we do not use this system in anything other than name. Be very clear. It's only our naming system that works that way. We consider these children biologically related. She is biologically related. Sociologically, we still consider them siblings, and we also think that their name is wrong.
You've got the wrong name. This stepmom will actually, when she talks about her grandchildren, she doesn't list these children. I know, I've had lots of fights about it because I'm like, so she lists her child, my stepsister's kid, which is her biological child's her biological, and she definitely lists my son. Right, so those are her grandsons. She has 2. It's like, nope, you have 5. 2, 5. 2 of them have the same last name as you, Mom, and it's not either of these 2. Right, Spencer Gray, Matthew Langell, right? It's not either of these 2. Because we're girls. You say, but that's not a girl. Yeah, okay, but thank God we got some Hunnix, right? And sadly, I feel really sorry for them. It's almost like the name cursed them. They have every trait a Hunnick would have. Like there's some biological sweet traits that we have, we carry, and these boys got every single one of them like on a checklist. They did not get spared any of one. We all have bad skin, right? We all have, well, they didn't get the lucky one, the green eye one, as much. But we all have noses that get into a room like 15 minutes before we do. I'm the only one without 5-head. 4-head, 5-head. I'm the only one without a 5-head. Everybody else, 5 heads. Right? And they got the Hunnick jaw. Very strange jaw we all have. I didn't get it. Don't look at me. I had my genes tempered by my mom. So I got a bigger nose than I probably would have had, but it didn't, it's still just a nose, man. And I got the green eyes of my dad, great. I got the skin of my dad, boo. Got the hair of my dad, boo. They all got the hair of dad, boo. Spencer loved dad, he got his father's hair. So, yeah, ambilineal descent, which is what you recognize, is tracing your descent through both your mom and your dad's side. But you may have a side that it may be ambilineal but favors one side over another. We are an ambilineal culture, but we favor the paternal side. You can see that we favor the paternal side by the immune system. Right? We do. I have a theory as to why, but it's just a theory, so I won't share. And in some ambilineal descent groups, you may be aware of both sides, not because, well, because they have different jobs for you. Like your father's family marries you, your mother's family marries you. Like the things, the important stages of your life, different parts of your family are involved in. In some places, the separation between the two sides of your family may be so significant that they may even call you by a separate name. You have a name that your mother's family calls you and a name that your father's family calls you. You know whether someone's mother's family or father's family based on the name they call you. That's how they indicate which side they're on. Now, we have, within our own marriage systems, we have a little bit of this kind of stuff. We have what we call mock hostility in our marital lines. We look at our in-laws as potentially a source of anxiety or conflict, but that's a whole other story, so don't mix that into ambilineal kin. All right, so a lineage in itself is a unilineal kinship group that's about descending from a common ancestor, and you know, they're traced, their links back to that common ancestor, but there are different kinds. Some lineages are direct lineages, where you know direct parent-child links. Some of them, there may be what we call fuzzy links. So, for example, if you belong to Clan of the Bandicoot, which there are truly bandicoots and wombats and a bunch of other stuff, but if you belong to Clan of the Bandicoot, you can know your father was Clan of the Bandicoot, and you can trace your dad, and your dad, and his 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 dad, Bandicoot. How do we get from Bandicoot to that first human? It was always a story, but that's what we would call a fuzzy link, right? Because it's sometimes fuzzy, it's kind of a joke. It's a clan totem. Clan totems are often hairy, so it's a fuzzy link. So if you're a clan of the Jaguar and you're all descended from Jaguar, you can go, Dad, his dad, his dad, his dad, his dad, Jaguar. How'd you get from Jaguar? He was born of Jaguar. So all the rest are what we call true blood links. We know and then fuzzy. So when we have a totem, it often works out that way. So this would be an example of tracing patrilineal. So again, she still belongs to the patrilineage, but she doesn't necessarily make any kids for it, right? He does. She's in the patrilineage. He makes kids for it, she does not. So we don't kick the female members out, is the important part there. Okay, matrilineage works almost the same way, except that what's interesting is in patrilineal descent, there's power in the male line. In matrilineal descent, you'd say that it would be there would be power in the female line. Sometimes. Most of the time, the power is in mother's brother. We'll get there. So clan is when you have a bunch of lineages usually together, and they're usually reinforced by totem. So there are people who assume they're related to each other, but maybe necessarily can't say how. We became aware of these when there was an anthropologist by the name of Robin Fox. I'm lucky about that name. He went to Australia, and in their clan system, they believe that there is no one not in it. Right? Everyone belongs to their clan system. So they get there, he gets there, and they say, hey, what clan are you from? And he goes, oh, no, I'm an American. Actually, he's a Brit. I'm a Brit. We don't belong to this system. And they said, nonsense, of course you belong to this system. Your elders didn't tell you. What's your name? And he was like, Robin Fox. And they said, what does that mean? Well, one is a bird, and the other is like a dog, a small dog. And we were like, oh. And they came up with, oh, what is that? Dingo. And they were like, oh, you are Dingo. Fox, obviously you're a dingo. Welcome, brother. And they just absorbed him into Dingo. So when people were like, well, how is he related? They were like, he's clan of Dingo. At some point, Dingo makes everyone in this clan. He's from Dingo. Clearly, his elders failed to tell him how, but he is. And he belongs to their lineage. And was treated as brother. Good thing, too. I'm like, God, imagine if I went, where are you from? Gray. What's that? Ecuador. Maybe it would be their god. Who knows? All right, so. Now, they can't strictly define how they're related, but they will describe themselves as all being blood relatives. Now, we do have some powerful lineages within our own culture. The Kennedys, for example, the closest thing we ever had to royalty. The Roosevelts, we had 2 in the White House, actually 3. Eleanor Roosevelt was a Roosevelt before she married. So technically we had 3 Roosevelts in the White House. And these were considered important families, the Rockefellers. Those were all powerful lineages. And while they're not as important here, they do become very important in Scotland. Have you ever been to a Scottish Heritage Festival where you wear the tartan of your family, right? You are clan so-and-so. We just did this with some friends. And my friend Brian, who's actually from Australia, was like, no, I belong to this clan. And she started showing me her tartan and the whole family thing, and it was very important who her lineage was. And it was all about her cultural standing. Which was, but you're Australian. He says, now, you're a Scotsman. Okay. But her clan still has importance back in Scotland. So, if it becomes too big, if you get a lineage that's just unmanageable, it will break down into these clans typically. You call it fission. So we start splitting these descent groups into more or new classifications. In Australia, and in a very hectic clan system, you may see them splitting into what we call moyes. Moyes is the French word for half or a freight train. phratry is two or more clans that see themselves as bound together. And often they are symbiotic animals. Like you may get kangaroo and grass seed. Kangaroo eats the grass seed, but kangaroo also disperses the grass seed by pooping the grass seed and therefore allowing the grass seed to live. So grass seed cannot exist without kangaroo. Kangaroo does not exist without grass seed. So they see themselves as part of that major thing. Now, when we get into religion, there'll be a discussion as to why it's an animal and why you have rules that you must never eat your clan totem. But you actually already get this. This is not very foreign to you. What is the totem for the United States? The eagle. And the eagle's name is? His name is Sam. And who is your uncle? Yes, not Uncle Cracker, but Uncle Sam is your uncle. So he's actually kin to you. Now, in some sort of weird-ass fictive way, he's kin to you, and you're like, bullshit, he's a bird, whatever. If I were to hand you a steaming plate of bald eagle right now, would you eat it? Hell no, right? No, we don't eat that. That is wrong, right? That is absolutely wrong. Yeah, forget the fine. Just, I mean, just on a personal level, it would just be weird to eat that. That's wrong, right? Okay, some of you are like, I'm all pro-sacrilege, whatever, rebel. But if you look at, how we feel about that, we just wouldn't do it. It's just weird. That is wrong. Just like if I took a dog and fed the dog to you, you'd be like, nope. But the bald eagle, which is something none of you have ever had as pets, could not have formed a personal emotional attachment to. You still wouldn't eat it. It's just, and that's your totem. We don't eat our totems. We don't. And by the way, in most cultures, if you eat your totem, you go blind. There are lots of things that can make you go blind, but eating your totem is one. So if you eat your totem, go blind, except in Australia, where you have to eat your totem once, and there's like a cycle to it. So you never eat your totem except the one time when you eat your totem to bring your totem back into your family. But you cannot kill your totem, because if you kill your totem, you also go blind. So one group will kill the other group's totem, they'll do a crisscross. They'll kill each other's totems so that they can eat their fathers. So, we use these clan identifications to reinforce our totems. Even in the United States, we have totems. We even have totems to represent our games, right? The Denver Broncos, right? The Seattle Seahawks. Right? Those, we have these things. And some of them, we all know, right? The Redskins. Right? Here's some totems that we're looking at. Hey, first of all, those are people. Stop making people your mascots. Just on that level alone, mascots are animals, not peoples. I know, the Oakland Raiders, but leave them alone. They're also people. So, which one? You have to have two or more clans that have some sort of relatedness to them. A moiety is it's going to be only two. They're going to be divided in half, and they form the basis of all of these. So moiety is half. Phratry is two or more. There could be three. There could be seven. But it's at least two. Okay, so this is how you would look at it as an organizational system. Lineages, clans, phratries, and moieties. And here's the thing about it. You can attach Patra, Matra, and Avunga to these. So patrilineal, right? Patrilineal means what? Father, right? What does matrilineal mean? Mother, right? Matra, anything means mother. Patra, anything means father. Avunga means uncle. Neo means new. So you can have a clan that is patrilineage, but is patrilineal? It's a Patra clan, but belongs to a Matra phratry. Okay, so I know. I realize your head just exploded. So, it's patrilineal in the sense that you figure your descent through your father, right? Patrilineal, and you know your dad is, your dad's dad, and all that. They belong to a Patra clan. which means it's a clan based on your father. But their moiety could be based on mothers. So you can have them in any basic combination. But the trick is, if it's a free tree, there's at least 2. That's really the only real rule we've got. Okay, now, moving on. So, in this diagram, which I realize right now it looks like we're trying to describe genetics. Yeah, it's kind of a mess. But it's the same diagram you have in your book, so don't freak out. In this diagram, we're describing how a kinship diagram is undertaken. All right, so what we're doing it is we're doing it from the point of view of ego. Who is ego? Yourself, right. Yourself is ego. And in this kindred, we are indicating our degrees of blood relatives from that person. This is basically just a schematic for figuring out how someone's related to you. Remember we were talking about first cousins once removed, as opposed to second cousin, third cousin, etc. This is actually how you figure it out. By the way, I used to do this as a job. I was lucky enough to get a job working for the man who invented cable. You know, cable television. Yeah, he was not unwealthy. And he decided that he wanted to follow his genealogy, and he hired me to do this job. So it was very important that I understood these things. There's some great records out there, by the way. Now, how we describe ourselves, this is very similar to our own. If you look at we'll say Inuit kinship terminology here for a second. The way they describe their brothers and sisters and their cousins is the same as we describe it ourselves. So if you were looking for how is it done, you might go to the Inuit kinship terminology. Hawaiian kinship terminology are very different. So in this case, you would never, by the way, put yourself as a square in ego. You know your own sex, right? If when turning it in, you put yourself in a square, I'm going to send you back out of the room and ask you to come back when you know whether you're a triangle or a circle, okay? The only time you can have a triangle inside a circle is if someone's in transition. All right, so in Hawaii, we have father, mother, brother, self, sister. Sister, by the way, is always Z, because S was used by son. All right, now, notice that father's brother is also named father. And that father's brother's kids are also brother, sister. And mother is also, father's sister is also mother, and her kids are brother, sister. And mom's side, mom's sister's kids are also brother, sister, and mom's sister's name is mom, and mom's brother's name is father, and his kids are also brother, sister. So basically, everyone who is in your parents' gen is father, mother. Everyone who's in your gen is brother, sister. And here's why this is important. So I had a student who went off to Hawaii in the middle of a semester, damn him, and he really it was very poor timing for many reasons. The first of which was he met a Hawaiian girl, he fell in love. And she took him home to meet her family, and she introduced him to her mother and her father and her mother and her father and her brothers and her sisters and her brothers and her sisters. And then he said, which one is your real parents? And she stopped and said, you will never understand us, and broke up with him on the spot. Because he was an idiot and didn't realize that she was telling him, all of these people have these obligations to me and me to them. They are all of equal importance to me. And he demanded, or he was asking for the white person version of this. Which ones are your real family? Which is a stupid concept. Right? So he lost out. This is why I think it's very important that you learn this. Should you go to Hawaii and fall in love. Okay? We'll continue this idea on Wednesday.